He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're diving back into the realm of newspapers. This time, however, focusing on the Balls of Light. Before we venture into that, however, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as our Patreon, where you get ad-free, early exclusive content. Now, one last show note before we continue. The format of the show is going to be subject to change here. With life and craziness, our Friday shows will cease to exist as we move into the new year. Now, Ruben and I had set the goal to do 2 episodes a week for a whole year, and we've successfully done just that. As we near the end of the year now, we realize all good things must come to an end, so sometime soon we'll be going back to our once-a-week format, with maybe the occasional extra episode a month, but we'll have to see when that bridge is crossed. Like I said, life, everything like that, it's just getting a little crazy. But rest assured, our Monday episodes with me and Ruben diving into an unknown, mysterious topic will still be here every Monday for you, so you can definitely stay tuned for that. And we'll be dishing out extra content on the Patreon every now and again then. So without further ado, let's get into this. So we got a very in-depth newspaper article to start with, which dabbles between paranormal and Balls of Light, mostly the Ball of Light though. It's from the Citizen Patriot, dated November 19th, 1970. And I quote, "During the summer and early fall of 1912, it seems that several persons saw ghosts, locally known as spooks, in the vicinity between Enterprise Cemetery, which is in the northeast of the northwest of 5234, 7 miles north, and 3.5 miles east of Beardsley, Kansas, and the Immaculate Conception Cemetery in the northeast west of 14235, 5 miles north of Beardsley, Kansas, just across the road from the spot where at that time stood the old Stutter Church, which was in the southwest of 11235. It is understood that these spooks were a bright ball of light, about 18 to 24 inches in diameter, that would appear on occasion, floating on the air along a road, through a pasture, or even through someone's yard. Always after dark, at times it appeared to chase people or livestock, but perhaps this was more by chance than design. The stories are many, but here are a few as told to me by my father, James Ceramic, who was a butcher in Atwood between 1891 and 1902, and had a farming interest after that time. It seems that grandfather MacLeod Ceramic, father James Ceramic, was walking along the road at night from the vicinity west of the Immaculate Conception Cemetery, going east to his son's, John J., place over 1.5 miles east of the cemetery. Grandfather was about halfway between the cemetery and his son's place when he happened to glance back and saw a ball-shaped light floating toward him from the west, perhaps 150 yards away. He felt that there would be no chance of outrunning it, as he was a heavy-set man, so he quickly slipped over to the side of the road and stretched himself out in the shallow weed-filled ditch. He held his breath as the light came closer and closer. He was hoping that the thing would pass by and not harm him. Luck was with him, for the light passed on by and proceeded quite some distance to the east and then vanished. At another time, John J. Sramek was visiting his brother Joseph and family who had a sod house due north of the Immaculate Conception Cemetery, a distance of a little over 1 mile in the southwest of the Southwest 2235. He started for home after dark in a south-southeasterly direction across his pasture where his horses were grazing. When he was about a quarter mile from his home, he heard the horses stampeding behind him. He quickly looked back and saw a ball of light chasing the horses toward him. He took off for home as fast as his legs could carry him in order to avoid being trampled by the frightened animals. He just barely made it to the house, where he slipped under the fence to safety. He turned around to look for the light, but saw nothing, only the milling horses. The light had vanished into thin air. One time, Father Placid Walker, OFM Cap, pastor of SS Cyril and Methodist Church, while taking care of the Stutter Church during the one Sunday allotted to that parish, was staying at the John J. Sramek Place, southwest of southeast of 11235. In the evening, after dark, he was out walking in the area northeast of the house and east of the building used as a buggy shed and supply building. As he turned west to go back to the house by way of a path that skirted the south side of the buggy shed, he saw a glow of light, as though someone were on the west side of the building with a lantern. Father Placid assumed that John J. Sramek was coming around the end of the shed carrying a lantern, on his way back to the house from the barn, which was a short distance to the northwest of the buggy shed. When Father Placid came past the southwest corner of the shed, he was confronted by a ball of light only a few feet away. Father came to a sudden stop, astonished at what he saw. Then, on impulse, he made the sign of the cross over the object, and it vanished immediately. There is a story told that a farmer was on his way home after dark on some road near the Enterprise Cemetery and headed south. Presently, he saw a light coming his way some distance behind him, and it was making a noise somewhat like a motorcycle. He decided to pull over his team and wagon to the side of the road and let the motorcycle go on by. As it turned out, it was not a motorcycle, but one of the balls of light which caught up with him and hit the back of his wagon with a loud thud, bounced back, hovered there for a moment, then floated away into a pasture at an angle to the road and disappeared into the distance. The fact that it was reported that the ball of light made a noise may be stretching the truth, as in the other appearances there was no sound. Perhaps the person involved said he thought it was a motorcycle coming, since he could only see one light. Someone else repeated the story and thought that the noise was part of the episode and retold the story that way. Also, there probably was no sound, or a very low sound, when the light hit the rear end of the wagon. In the summer of 1912, according to Frank Rie, he and Herman Anthals were traveling on foot from the Henry Anthals Place, northeast of 36134, to the Herman Anthal Place. The route they took was a short distance east of Henry's Place, then due north for about 1/2 mile to Herman's Place, southeast of northeast of 25134. The Anthals neighborhood was 9 miles north of Atwood, or a quarter mile north of South Driftwood Creek, and a little over 1 mile west of what now is Highway K25. On the way, they encountered a spook, a ball of bright light, about 24 inches in diameter, floating on the air as it traveled along the road. They ran after it as fast as they could, hoping to catch it, but it kept well ahead of them at about 10 feet above the ground. Finally, before reaching Herman's Place, the spook veered off into a field and soon vanished. Later on that evening, they were coming from the north, approaching Herman's Place, when they noticed a ball of light a ways east of the road, resting at the top of an old straw pile. The men headed in its direction as fast as they could, but the spook disappeared by the time they arrived at the scene. Herman set fire to the pile, and it was said that it put an end to the spooks in that area. At one other time, Frank Rie saw one of the lights west of Enterprise Cemetery, about a distance of 1/3 mile. He also chased this one, but it always managed to stay well ahead and out of reach. It later vanished somewhere near the cemetery. Paul Rie said that one night he was traveling east on foot at about 10 p.m. from the Rie Place, center of south edge of south quarter, southwest 31-134. About 1/2 mile east of the Rie Place, he saw a spook in the direction of Enterprise Cemetery. He increased his walking speed, but never caught up with it, and it disappeared before he covered the distance to the cemetery. According to John Pitney, as he remembered it, about the year 1913, his father George Pittner and family were living on a farm northwest of 32134, about 3/4 miles northwest of the Enterprise Cemetery. It was early fall with a light covering of snow on the ground. George went to visit the Ryba family, northeast of 8234, only 3/4 miles east of the Enterprise School. He did not start for home until after midnight. Since it was so late, he decided to take a shortcut across the fields and headed for home in a northwesterly direction, which led him quite near the Enterprise Cemetery. And as the story goes, on the way, George was confronted by 3 spooks, one ahead of him and one on each side. The light was quite bright and blinded him for an instant. There was also a slight humming sound coming from the spooks. Needless to say, George was frightened and wasted no time making tracks for home. But they continued to follow him. He increased his speed and finally started running for a distance of about half a mile beyond the cemetery. He was already quite exhausted, so he turned, faced the spooks, and shouted, "If you are the devil, take me. If not, leave me alone." He then again faced north and somehow reached the house and stumbled in. The sweat was running down his face, and his clothes were soaked with perspiration. By the time he was able to catch his breath and relate what had happened to him, the spooks had vanished. It was said that John J. Sramek made a statement to the effect that dogs lying on the front porch would make quite a fuss if any person approached the house after dark, or if any stray animals came through the yard. But at any time that a spook would cross the yard, the dogs would ignore it and keep quiet. Some naturally superstitious people who saw spooks or heard about them believed that they were the souls of sinful people who died. Since they were not bad enough to be damned to hell and not good enough to get into heaven, they were obliged to work out their purgatory by roaming the earth seeking rest. Actually, there was a good natural reason for the existence of spooks. Frank Reese stated that in the winter of 1911 and 1912, there was a lot of snow and that it was possible that old straw piles produced a form of phosphorescent gas or a ball of luminescent bacteria because of the decaying action taking place during the summer of 1912. It was believed that the gas or bacteria accumulated at the top of the stacks in a ball shape, then broke away and floated on in the air. A process of oxidation, or the swarms of the bacteria would cause it to glow. It seems there was a very slight sound or commotion connected with the flight of the ball of light. It is not known if the spooks appeared in any part of the county or outside the county. There is another possibility as to the origin of the spooks. It is a known fact that in more humid areas, decaying vegetation and swamps cause luminous gases to form and float away on their air currents. It is possible that since there was an abundance of moisture during the year of the spooks, many lagoons were full of water, and perhaps the lights originated from these small swamps. End quote. What a hefty article this was. I love it. I want to first off report on how the speculation on these souls being stuck in purgatory, it's very interesting and also connects well with the father's account, how he dismissed the ball of light immediately with the cross motion. Could that be a coincidence? Absolutely it could, but the timing is pretty spot on. Before I continue, however, let's take a quick ad break. And we're back. One of the more common things that I've noticed here is orbs tend to be very intrigued. They're either following you or they want you to follow them, and you can never really catch up to them. Now, personally, I've heard many people speak to how you shouldn't interact with these things. Can I speak to that myself based on personal interaction or experience? No, I cannot, nor will I. But I will say that interaction or not, they are always frequently reported as trying to interact with these individuals, these people. Whatever their intentions are, it is but beyond me. I like that this article tries to showcase a little bit of the possible, I don't want to say scientific because even scientific is a very it's a tricky term to use in this area with cryptids and mysteries, but I like how they tried to create a rationalization at the end of the article with certain individuals that saw these things say, okay, maybe it is somehow with the chemicals and the bacteria on top of the straw piles, or maybe it is due to the more humid temperatures and the swamps that are producing these gases, which in turn form these lights. That is something I explore more in a previous episode of the Orbs. If you definitely go back to our main feeds, you can find that episode for more information. But what are the glowing orbs of light? In short, I'll give kind of like a follow-up here. So they are free-floating, transparent globes of light energy that are commonly attributed to spirits. Now, let it be known that they aren't limited to only being a globe in shape. They vary in both size and color. People do interpret the colors as meaning different things to specific individuals that encounter these things. In some cases, the orb colors seem to coincide with that of a person's chakras. If you're unfamiliar with chakras, they are basically focal points throughout our body that connect our top to our bottom spiritually. And it's always important that we keep these focal points open to allow the flow of energy to go from like point A to point B and so forth. I digress, though. Now, while orbs are visible to the naked eye, many a time people capture them in photographs or even security cameras. While dust reflecting off light in cameras is a very real thing, orbs tend to have a very intelligent method of movement to them that I think differs them enough from standard dust specs that people can note and see these things and think, okay, this is definitely something more than dust moving around in the room. However, let's go into our next newspaper report here from the Cincinnati Enquirer on November 2nd, 1878. And holy smokes, did they ever fill newspapers to the brim back in the day? So I'm not reading off the whole thing, but I found the more prominent part of the balls of light here that I'm going to focus on from this article. And I quote, "Lights of marvelous beauty and significance. When we first begun to see these lights, they attracted no special attention, for Mrs. Allen and myself had seen them hundreds of times before, but they soon began to assume a character at once so remarkable and interesting as to challenge our deepest and most critical attention. A few evenings after they first began to appear, we observed that they would dart swiftly from one part of the room to another, move about in circles, suddenly enlarge to 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and then as suddenly contract to the size of a pea. Some very vividly bright, others of a dull pale color. Some would revolve and throw off smaller points of light, which would revolve about the first like a satellite. And some would burst like a volcano. And others would explode, and a column of smoky vapor would rise 2 or 3 feet and vanish. One evening, we observed a light of unusual size and brilliance forming, when, to our astonishment, it darted to the table and wrapped around quickly and sounded like a hard stone. It then moved away to the corner of the room and dissolved, but almost instantly it formed again, moved to the table swiftly, and did the same thing as before, as it moved about and turned itself in all directions. We saw that it was oval in form, and about as large as a goose egg, say 5 inches long and 3.5 inches through. It was self-luminous and so intensely bright that it illuminated the top of the table so that we could see the sheet of paper and pencil lying on it when it moved near them. Pretty soon we observed something dark moving about on this wondrous ball of light, and directly we saw a finger, and then another, and then all 4 fingers of a hand moving over the ball. It moved about to each one of us so that we could examine it closely. The fingers were as perfectly formed as we ever saw, and looked just as natural and lifelike as the fingers any of us sitting in the circle." End quote. Now this one, I like the old accounts of just people focusing on the unknown. However, this one is very interesting because it's the first time that I've ever seen someone describe a more manifestation coming from an orb. While people usually experience a feeling or associate an orb or a ball of light with something else, to actually see a manifested hand forming around this thing, that's terrifying. But it does seem to coincide, in my personal opinion, with people's beliefs that these orbs of light could be the souls, again, not necessarily of anyone damned and to stay in purgatory, but more so the souls of loved ones that are coming to interact. Now, you always have to be careful, because what if these things are pretending, or they are a negative force and they want you to interact with them, because once you interact with them, then they can kind of latch onto you and then they can do whatever they want. But I digress. It's still a very murky territory of what these things really are. But for our last article, this is jumping into more recent times, and it's focusing a little bit more into the paranormal. And I quote, "The Brown County Democrat, January 5th, 2003. When Indiana ghost trackers traveled to Story in search of ghostly spirits Friday, January 3rd, they found a number of peculiar findings. According to President Mike McDowell, 15 investigators worked in 3 groups of 5 from about 11:30 p.m. to 2:30 a.m., taking turns conducting tests in the inn, a nearby barn, and Story founder Dr. George Story's old house. The ghost trackers initially did studies at Story Inn in September. At that time, one had a hunch that a young man had hung himself from one of the rafters in the barn. Mr. McDowell said a completely different person picked up on the same thing in the same location. Another tracker believed someone had committed suicide in the barn. However, Mr. McDowell said no records of deaths in the barn have been confirmed. On the hill in the house of Dr. Story, trackers picked up many strange voices as they recorded electronic voice phenomenon. Although the group has not listened to all of the recordings, Mr. McDowell said there were very faint voices that were hard to pick up. The ghost tracking team also took many photographs which reveal orbs of light that Mr. McDowell said could indicate supernatural entities. While the ghost trackers found some ghost-like findings, Mr. McDowell had been anticipating for a little more. He said when it comes to the paranormal, we won't always find exactly what is expected. They, ghosts, don't work on cue, said the tracker's president. I'm sure we'll be back. The Story in itself has been said to have been haunted for many years. End quote. Now, this was important because it brings to a conclusion the orbs and the possible paranormal ghostly connections it shares, as we've talked about cemeteries, maybe the rationalization of swamps and such, but well, we cannot dismiss the possibility of maybe fairies or other ethereal beings, just as likely that it could be the case of an undead spirit. But I'm reaching a point where I question everything. I have to, because the way that things are just changing and we're kind of learning, I won't say understanding, but we're learning of new things. Understanding is a stretch word to use in this field. But yeah, now that we've done a couple episodes on the orbs, again, like I said, the orbs are available to listen to on, I think, definitely one episode that we did. I can't remember if we focused in on another one with Ruben or not, because I know I wanted to get him on the show to talk about the orbs, but they've popped up in passing conversation with Sasquatch, UFOs, and other paranormal discussions. So definitely tune in, because we got more content coming your way as we conclude this episode of Campfire Clues. We'll be back next week on Monday, where Ruben's diving into his solo episode of The Cowman. This is something you've probably heard him talk about on previous shows. He's so excited to get into this, and he finally has it. It's up on our Patreon now, but it's going to be dropping on our live feeds on Monday. So until then, however, you can find us on our Facebook, CryptidClues.ca, social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. We're also on Patreon, where you can get ad-free early episodes, and be sure to send us an email if you want to say hi or share anything. CryptidClues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.